everyone. Welcome to Aquarian Light, a place for those who love truth, growth, and wisdom. My name is Ruth, student of esotericism.
And my name is Adonis. I am a mystery student and an initiate on the path of initiation.
Today we're going to be having a conversation about recent themes that have been coming up for the collective that we've been observing and noticing. There are so many threads that we've been watching, and the themes keep changing. When you're busy observing, you can notice whatever is coming up for you. You can see similar threads for the collective, and the latest challenges and crises have been exactly the same. They've been something that we can observe on a smaller scale with the individuals around us, and on a larger scale with larger groups, maybe not so close to home as well. So to open the subject, what are we talking about, Adonis?
We had a few talks in the past few weeks. I think originally we were talking about conscious willpower and disconnecting from the construct, unplugging from the matrix, however you want to say that, and how we can disidentify from the concept of duality to open our eyes to a more objective reality, you know. And that then led us to our talk, the last talk that we had, which we were talking about what is one of the biggest deterrents to being able to make that comprehension and that leap forward. And we talked a lot about mystical pride, mythomania, things like that. And it's very interesting, as you put it. We started, I think, in general, just talking about things that we were dealing with ourselves, maybe perhaps like just things that we see in certain like groups, like our peers that are going on. And it was very, very like small scale, innocent. And, there was that aspect to it. It was just, it felt like the right moment to talk about certain things. And, since then, there's been just like, it's just so interesting how the threads that come down from source and just how like widespread certain things are, like to where it almost feels like it's like, all right, well, here's the message that came down for me. And who am I? Nobody, right? I'm walking on the path of initiation, no, not really far along at all, to be fair. I'm just working diligently. And, maybe you think like certain things are relevant to you personally. You think certain things are, maybe to help you like discern who would be a good teacher for you, and then all of these types of things. And it's just really funny because, you just deliver a message, no attachment to that whatsoever, no real, like, not even really knowing what the ramifications are or what it really means. And then it comes along to, it just blows up and it snowballs from there. And it's just so fascinating to watch these threads that are being like pulled, and things are just come out on such a larger scale. So instead of it, just being like about us and our friends or whatever, we start to notice these trends and these like overarching and just groups and people that we look up to, and all of these things, and things are just become revealed. And it's just, I don't know, it's just interesting. And uh really, it shows just how hard it really is for us to detach from the illusion of duality, right? So I mean, when and it also shows actually the trappings of, we could be very, very advanced, very far along in our journey, and there's the ability to become complacent, right? There's the ability to still get comfortable where we're at. We may have all these abilities, and we have all this wisdom and experience, and we can still get comfortable in the place that we're at, and that becomes our new reality. And now we're comfortable with that. We think we know all that we need to know, and we forget that, the work comes down to practicing three factors, and it really doesn't change, right? All the way through mastery, you could be a master. We still have to do the same things to continue to expand consciousness. In a sense, right? Consciousness is infinitely expanding. So it's really, as we go through awakening, whether from the beginning or to the end, right? It's a series of reality breaking events. So every time we come to new comprehension, every time our reality shifts, every time we raise vibrations a little bit, our reality changes. And it's never good to get comfortable, never good to be complacent, and never think that we're solid in where we're at, and that is it, that's the truth, that's objective reality. Because truly, unless we go back to the absolute, reality is not objective. It's always, there's always subjectivity. And it's just interesting to see, you know, you get put into a situation where you deliver a message, and then there's, people maybe you look up to, maybe there's people that have more wisdom than you, definitely have more experience than you, more abilities than you. So there's not even a question about like, anything like that. And you say something that came down, maybe you got a message, and you say something that disturbs the reality, though, that certain people are in, or certain organizations are in. And then all of a sudden, there's this pushback. And then it's valuable, for your own observation, right? You all of a sudden you're getting slandered and put down, and nobody's listening to you, nobody understands you. There's like this,
The
dismissal of what you're,
judgment and false accusation.
judgment, also just all of this just being misunderstood. And in a sense, and you're just sitting there, you just observe yourself, you feel it, right? It's not like these things, like the egos are not there, right? The egos are there, that's what people are seeing. But the thing is like, right, it's like, okay, so I'm full of ego, and maybe, it comes out through, even if you're saying something that's coming from source, it comes out unpolished. It comes, even as you're saying it, maybe the delivery is off, right? Like, it's like, oh, I meant to say this, because you're observing that yourself, and you're not taking anything hard or the wrong way. You're just sitting there and just delivering a message, and then to just get slammed and slammed and slammed. This is really interesting, because in a sense, right, it's like, okay, well, whenever we talked about this, whenever there's resistance, right, whenever we see something in someone else, right, it's because there's something corresponding within us. But if we're observing ourselves, and this experience I think is valuable, I think, for both of us, right, in observing ourselves, right, here we sit, we're smiling, we're having a good time and having this conversation, we're not getting angry or offended. And there's been, bad things said, especially about me, so and it's just interesting, because it's like, well, here we are, and there's all these, like, these voices and this chatter, and really, there's a lesson. Obviously, there's a lesson for us, there's also a lesson for everyone else. And people seem to forget that when, we move along and we go further, that perhaps we have blind spots, perhaps we should also still be observing ourselves. There's a straight fact here that, like, if you're getting upset, if you're, getting offended or feel disrespected when somebody's just delivering a message that they got from internally, not charged or anything, then you're the one that is identifying with ego. But everybody else is just saying, if you're accusing someone else of being ego that is observing this as aware of it, then, perhaps the work is to look back at ourselves. And it's just interesting, because it's in a learning experience, in a learning way, we can really see that, the trappings, right, of duality itself.
Yeah, and I guess we don't want to say anything about anyone else in particular, but it's this phenomena of how the ego is, how it appears, how the universe shows us our state by presenting a mirror for us, means that no matter where we are in our spiritual journey, whenever the mirror is presented to us, it's always going to be two sides, right? There's going to be the person that you look at and you think that they're wrong. And the message for everyone is only, what does that reflect upon in me? What are my takeaways for me? Because if we point the finger, then we don't grow, we don't observe, we don't get anywhere. So, but the other thing that's come out with all this has really been highlighted, has been dogma, because for those of us who are students of esotericism, and maybe we are in contact with some modern mystery schools, maybe several, we have this unique position where those who have been in a particular school for a long time, they are accustomed to their own traditions, and they didn't used to be traditions, they used to be something new, and then over time now they are traditions. And the commitment of those individuals means that they have also become isolated in those communities, and so they see things a certain way. But for those of us who may interact with different groups, we can see how everyone has their own strengths and weaknesses, or they have their own areas where they seem to be very aligned with source. But in the same way that you and I, we're not perfect, and we have our blind spots, we have our things that we need to work on that are really hard for us to see for ourselves, and someone else can just stand there and say, look, I can see your problem, and then we get defensive and we don't see it. In that same way, those mechanisms that work in all of us can work in other individuals or other organizations. And so what that means is these different groups may do really well in one area, but the area that they may be maybe more traditional rather than following source, those areas, they can't necessarily see that, but they will believe that those traditions are also from source. And it's simply because over time, any structure that is built up, it is an artificial pause or a knot in the universe. And whilst it can be full of life and it can be a nourishing structure, there is an element of stagnation that comes from anything that stands for a long time in these realms. So what is a new movement? What is a revolution? It's where the old structures that have become so old and archaic and have finally become too stagnant get torn down, and the same universal wave of energy and life that's flowing through everything now builds up something new, something different, and something that's going to serve the purpose of the modern time. And in the same way that when the first wave from Samuel Onveyor of all these, the unveiling of these esoteric teachings was revolutionary. It was something that he got in trouble with the mystery schools of his time for doing, because none of those mystery students and secret schools wanted that information to get out. That was something that was going against the trend for those groups. In that same way, there may be students of esotericism now in this technologically advanced time that are utilizing the internet or making videos or connecting with people from across the globe and using technology, and also doing things in general probably different to how the modern mystery schools do them, and also different to how schools in ancient Egypt and Greece were doing things, right? So things change over time. And it's important to remember the thing that we want to preserve is not so much the tradition as it is the universal principles. And some rites and rituals, they can they can have their particular, ways of doing things, and this has to go here and that has to go there, but what is the principle, and what is happening with the intention, the energy, the conscious willpower? That's something that's more interesting to me rather than dogma. But again, this is something that it can happen to anyone.
Mhm. Well, that's true. And again, what is tradition, right? Tradition is an attachment to something that we do all the time. We spoke about conscious willpower, and what conscious willpower, right? It's our intentions are set in a certain way, and that is really how reality is controlled. It's literally the collective's intention set a certain way. These rituals, these things are help to design us at a certain level of awareness to unconsciously maybe tap into intentions that we aren't able to control ourselves, but they're not a substitute for the actual work. And really what's important is the actual work in any type of way. We could go through many religions, many ancient mythologies, right? You know, the language can change. It could be flowery, it could be this subjective this way, subjective that way. You know, some cultures use psychedelics, others, you know, put down even the idea of touching anything, right? It doesn't really matter, right? The end of the day is tools, whatever, tarot, astrology, all those things are great. They work, but they have to be transcended, right? Because at a certain level, they're still part of the construct and the matrix itself. And the focus of everything really should be on the three factors that we talked about. There's the death of the ego. There's, I don't think we talked about transmutation, but there's the controlling of the energies in the body, not to get too complicated into that. And then also sacrifice for humanity, you know, and service to others. And those three things are the same three things that we have to do from at any point in the path. Maybe, you know, yes, they increase in intensity level as we awaken more consciousness, because it takes more of each to continue to advance, but it doesn't change. And as we advance, we raise our vibrations and we shift realities, right? So the goal is to get to realities that these things don't matter, and we have to transcend these concepts of maybe like how we look, or even concepts like gender, thing, all these things like that are, I mean, irrelevant at the higher planes. Absolutely, they're irrelevant. Even the concept of good and evil, yes, that can help us get onto the path at first. It helps us stay away from, if we want to see the ego as the devil. But remember, the devil is something that the ego created so that we could blame something outside of ourselves that isn't our inner perception. It may be a symbol for our internal perception, but it's also an excuse for us to say like, oh, well, the devil made me do it, right? But at the end of the day, the actual enemy, the actual devil, is how we perceive reality. So if we don't work on that, then you know, yeah, sure, we can awaken our powers, we could go to the astral, we could be attacked by all sorts of monsters and creatures that are creations of our own mind. um these things can last and persist in individuals, even with awakened faculties. In fact, it's dangerous to not be able to transcend this and then start awakening your faculties. Samael and Viors talked about Hanamusen, right? So to awaken the consciousness through the ego, to still be attached to concepts like light and darkness and things like that at a level where you could get to a level of consciousness that, say, we're going to the astral every time we go to sleep because we don't like have dreams anymore. But every time we go to the astral plane, we're getting attacked by, you know, demons. Well, that makes the work so much harder. It's really important to have a good fundamental base in this, because otherwise, you know, it almost makes it impossible to advance as we go further, and we awaken these faculties, and then the ego starts to use these faculties. It makes it almost impossible to advance to the level that we need to once you get deeper into the work. So it's very important to realize, and we look at duality. We talked about how everything is made of consciousness. So we talked about how that's why conscious willpower is so important. And in a sense, there's that trinity, right? Like I believe I mentioned the example of the atom. I'm not sure if I did in the podcast or not, but the fact that everything has a positive force, a negative force, and then a force that binds those together. And that's how physical reality is created. All of the dimensions down from the sixth dimension down, they're all created from consciousness in that way. It's a three in one sort of thing. But it's that the vibrations, light, sound, it's how matter crystallizes, but it's really all just consciousness vibrating at different levels of frequency. In that sense, everything is made of consciousness. So the ego too, right, is made of consciousness, and it too has its own trinity, right? And that's, you know, positive is our desires, the negative is our aversions, our fears, and then the force that binds it together keeps us trapped within the ego, that neutral force, which is illusion itself. And as long as we are in that illusion, that we believe that duality, even though it's necessary for creation, but we believe that it is real and it is not an illusion, then we will always be trapped in it. We can move things around. We can work on our fears. We're not afraid of anything. Now we think we can act like we're super powerful or do that. Or we could, you know, just be in our egos and think we suppressed them. Oh, so I suppressed all the things that I do, all the debauchery, but really I'm holding all this negative fear inside and I'm just afraid of letting it express. And I'm still feeding these egos, right? So unless we comprehend the fact that duality itself is an illusion of the construct, it's necessary, right? We can't be sitting here right now talking to each other if we don't have duality. It is part of the three forces that creates the universe. but the universe is an illusion for consciousness to experience itself and play around with itself, for us to talk. We are all one, right? It's a multiple perfect unity. So it we need to understand that our relationship to it was messed up, right? The ego itself is not bad or evil. The ego is just there for us to create it. So we learn it and then we go back to where we came from, right? It's like we're playing a game. Maybe it's like a video game or something, right? But the thing is, it's our relationship that's messed up to it. We actually believe it's real and we're asleep and we think that it's real. And we can think that it's real for a very long time. You know, we're asleep in the third dimension, but expanding our awareness to just that there's a fourth or fifth dimension, to the astral, to astral project, to go into the jinn state, all these things, that's great. You're still not awakened from the matrix. To really unplug, you have to connect to that causal six-dimensional knowledge that everything is illusion, everything is Maya, like the Buddha talked about. It's beyond the mind, right? The mind traps us here. And I think of Neo in the Matrix movies, right? You know, the first movie, they break out of the 3D, he goes back to Zion, and you know, everything is great and dandy there. That's supposed to be like he's awakened, now he knows the truth. And then comes, I believe it's like the third movie, he realizes he can still use his powers there, and then he has to go to the machine city, because really, you know, it's an allegory for like he broke out of the matrix and then he's still in the matrix, right? Until all the source code is brought down, until all the machines are brought down, you're still in the matrix. The matrix is bigger and maybe more frightening, but that's still part of the matrix. I mean, it's great symbology with that too. So that whole concept, you know, like we're in Plato's cave, but we're in Plato's cave inside of another Plato's cave. You know what I mean? There's you have to there's levels to it, and you don't need to necessarily like awaken 100% consciousness to come to that realization, but you could actually not come to that realization and awaken a lot of consciousness. That's where the issue is. We have to teach how to come to that realization. We can come to that realization fairly early in the work if we just focus on the fundamental basics of dissociating from the concept of duality, as opposed to focusing on, say, powers and, you know, mythical evil forces that we're trying to escape and all of that. I mean, like I said, it helps us at a certain extent. There is a certain point. I do think you have to reach like a certain threshold to actually be able to unplug without like losing your mind, right? That's why people can have mental illnesses, schizophrenia and stuff. It's not, you know, you can't just unplug, I guess, if you're like at baseline. But it's still fairly early where you can start to have these self-awareness moments. You don't need to be fully self-aware 100% of the time, right? Even if you're just at the point where you can self-remember yourself and be self-aware enough to know that, like, oh, when you snap out of it, oh, I'm an ego again, even if you have to do it 500 times a day. If you're at that point, then you are already capable of dissociating from duality. It's just, do you want to face that ego? Do you want to face your traumas? Because, like I said, your fears are involved in this, right? The negative aspect of ego is fear. A lot of times, people don't want to face their fears; they only want to face the egos. Or it could be vice versa. They faced all their fears and then they think they don't have to face their egos because, oh, well, now, you know, I figured out the truth. I suppressed the negative end of it. So, you know, coming to that realization that duality is an illusion and unplugging, I mean, it doesn't take being a master to do that. It's just, we have to focus on it and not get fascinated and caught up in all of the other things that come with occult and spiritual. And look, there's a lot of great things. I mean, you know, we start to go to outer space or something, and astral experiences and stuff. And then, you know, we get fascinated by looking at ourselves in the mirror at first, and then you put us with a galaxy or a star in front of us. And it's really hard to not get fascinated by that too. But we have to resist that urge to, you know, want to fill the intellect with all these things that we see in the dream world, because it's just even more illusion, and a lot more illusion, and a lot more seductive illusion at that as well.
That's a good word for it. It's way cooler.
No, way
It's,
cooler.
yeah.
But
Yeah, still a trap. I like
definitely
that
fun.
you mentioned the Buddha, and Buddhists have the experience where they see that all is illusion, they see that it is Maya, and that's what's referred to as the great reality. When in different Buddhist meditation teachings, they talk about going into jhanas or different states of consciousness or awareness perception, and they reach a certain level where now the awareness has come outside of the illusion and sees the truth, that all of this is just one big dream. In Hinduism, it's Brahma's dream. And there's all these mythologies and references to it. And yet, when you have mystery schools in this day and age, and there are so many of both the light and dark variety, and probably everything in between, and sometimes you can't really tell which one they are because they present a certain way on the outside. It's almost like these schools have a vested interest to keep the students, and this could be an unconscious vested interest. I mean, most vested interests are, that's how the ego works, right? It's an unconscious desire, and it behooves the school that is established to operate up to a certain point, because past that point the students become independent, and then there's no more school, there's no more need for a school. And I've heard some schools talk about it where they may reference in the beginning that, one example I heard was, think of the tools in the spiritual trade school as a little boat that helps you to cross a river. And then after you cross the river, you need to just walk on and forget about the boat. So they did make sure to let students know, hey, don't become attached to the tools. However, the school is established on the basis that we're going to be teaching you these tools for the next 40 years. So you can throw away the tools and move on to your independence in about 40 years' time. So it's an interesting conundrum, because I don't think any serious spiritual seeker or teacher intends that, but it's more like a byproduct of the dynamic. It's a byproduct of those kinds of relationships between the instructors and the students. And when I say this, I'm not saying that we don't need instructors or that we don't need support from others that are also practicing with the tools or that are making their own progress. Because even if you didn't have a school, there is power in a group coming together in unity. And the key here is unity, because we're all at different stages. We are having different incarnations. And when you have a school, there's kind of this feeling of, okay, everyone fall into line. This is how it is. But that kind of a dogma doesn't acknowledge the unique paths of those individuals. And yes, we know your being could have a reason to bring you into a school for a certain time and then bring you out of a school for a certain time. And, or maybe the school was the best thing that your being could get you to, but it didn't really necessarily need you to be in that school as such, but that was the thing that was there that was going to do the job for what was required. So it's not as black and white as a lot of people think. And schools may think that the best thing for the student, or the only way this should play out, is you should come here and you must be here the whole time. But then that doesn't see the bigger picture and the cosmic plan. It's not that simple.
Yeah, now when we talk about things not being black and white, I think a good example here on what you just said too is we actually spoke about this in the last talk that we had, but we talked about how the ego of of like evil will can actually like make us get identified with the fact that everybody has a unique path. So it's like, oh, so how can we say this now going the other way? And that's, but it's actually true. The thing is like it's both true and false, right? So in a sense, right, internally the being is who really walks the path, and internally all of our beings have to go through the same initiation to do the same thing. How though it manifests in our external world, while our being is going through these initiations, is what is the unique experience and the unique manifestation. And it's so interesting because you could be having all these markers internally, and you're like, listen, like this is happening, this is happening. And because your external is not going the way that, say, somebody assumes that it should go because it's not going the same way their external world, well, then you're lying. That's not true. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter that it's exactly the points along the line that are like written down by the masters. Like this happened, this happened, this happened, this happened, because, well, the external doesn't match up, right? So there's a balance between it too. Like, yes, there's certain things that need to happen, but there's also, like I said, how that expresses and how that happens on the outside could be completely different. But if the internal markers are there, it's not right necessarily to, well, at least don't doubt yourself, because if other people are telling you to doubt yourself, then that in that situation is wrong. We just need to remember that, like we said, the path is internal, and there's certain things that do need to happen, as opposed to, earlier on, maybe we do have to follow advice if we're not having these internal experiences, and maybe, these things are okay for someone at that level, right? There's rules that are set to help us get to the point where we can dissociate from this stuff and then start having the experience itself. But also, like I said, eventually we actually start to walk the path. And I don't mean like we're doing the practices. We actually start to walk the path internally. We have experience. Our being starts to go through initiations. Once we reach that point, the only thing that matters is our internal experiences. For somebody to tell you that because externally you have to go through a different adventure to have those internal experiences, that you're doing the wrong thing, is not really right. We're not supposed to, you know, tell others what they have to do for their own journey. We only advise. It's the same thing with certain things. Like, we can sit here right now and say that, yes, you have to transcend tools, but if someone's still at a level where they need to, use the tarot, or I don't know, they have psychedelic experiences, either what we tell them is, you know what, those things will not help you eventually wake consciousness. We're not going to recommend them to you, because eventually, you shouldn't be using them. They're not going to help you. But if they, at this point, draw you to doing the work, just remember the work is first. Remember to practice 3 factors, dissolve the ego in meditation. And you know what will end up happening is that person will go through those things. As long as they're doing the work, they will come to the own comprehension at their own point in time that those things aren't okay for them. You don't need to tell somebody what to do or force them to do something. All we need to do is make sure that everybody is doing the work and be there to guide them. We give the advice. We don't lie. We tell them the truth. We don't have to add subjectivity and try to scare people, or act like a cult or something, because that certainly is not necessarily great either. It
That's
scares
pretty
people
scary
away.
too.
Yeah, well, here's the thing, right? Not to get into a certain amount of things, but everybody can tell by the way the world is right now, it's not super great, right? The state of the collective, right? So, we need to help people from all facets of life, and what resonates, say, with, a Latin American in the 1950s that was already very religious, might not resonate today with the modern generation, and the things that they're doing in such a degenerated but also like more free society, right? In a certain way, yes, it's more egoic, but also there's been a lot of like works, because the ego has worked its way into also trying to trick people as people are awakening, right? There's natural, everybody can tell, like, if we go through that, there's a flux since like 2012 of like spontaneous awakenings. So like people are just, their powers are awakening even though they're not even doing any work. So what does the ego do? Naturally, even if our powers work a little bit, we're not doing the work, we're going to be drawn towards things that are more towards the light, right? We start to realize there's more to reality. So now we want to be more compassionate, do all these things. Because of that, the ego it's clever. So it's gotten more tricky. So, it has its rhetoric. Actually, you can see this along political lines in most of the world, right? But you have this rhetoric for the people that are still like conservative and trapped into the standard egoic, I'm self-centered and narcissistic. And then you have this other side that it's like, the ego has designed all these super righteous movements and stuff, and really to get this side to hate this side. And these are the people that probably would awaken on their own, but then they get caught up in that, which is also the ego. And then granted, that's because those people aren't even doing the work. They don't even know, maybe even know about it, or they're not interested in it either. But like, they've awakened somewhat extent to the natural wave of it, And those people are probably more likely to say, be able to find their way to the work. But those people are also the ones that are most likely to be scared away by like conservative ideals of the 1950s and some of the language that's used that's very subjective and arbitrary that has nothing to do with practicing the three factors. So if we're reaching out across that to like this new age community, people that are aware of spirituality, but just not the truth about it, it might not be best to come across these lines of this like strict, rigid, like conservative ideals, right? Like if you're trying to reach the most people, just not just an observation logically of the climate of the planet today. And like I said, most important thing is get people to practice three factors. You don't need to tell them that you can't do this, you can't do this. They should figure that out for themselves. Unless it's like something like really terrible, like somebody's like a drug addict. Okay, well maybe they should stop, like doing heroin or something before they start the work. But I mean, in most cases, somebody say socially drinks with their friends or goes to pubs. Yes, we should not drink alcohol, but also, once we work, and this is from personal experience, when we work through the factors and we work through dissolving the ego, we get to a point where legitimately our natural state feels better than when we drink alcohol. Why do most people drink alcohol, for example, or smoke marijuana, or one of these like habit forming substances that really suppresses the consciousness? Well, we do it to feel pleasure, right? It makes us feel better than our normal state when we're really unconscious. Well, as you get more conscious, it literally makes you feel worse because it suppresses the consciousness. And once you're already in tune with your vital body, once you're already in tuned more with the universe and nature and this like unconditional love, well, then, you have two drinks and you start to feel a buzz. That buzz that you used to enjoy becomes a buzz that literally makes you feel worse. And then on top of it, if you were to keep drinking, you have a hangover, right? So you don't need anybody at that point to tell you to stop drinking. You will say, I don't want to drink anymore because this doesn't make any sense. and that's just a natural progression, and that same could be true about all the things that we get attached to. Is we just do the work, we will eventually intuitively like awaken from those things. And
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 that's gnosis. That's
Mhm.
gnosis is where you experience internally an understanding that causes you to change your outer behavior from the inside rather than from the outside. Every rote method or religion that's now become shrouded in culture and has the fundamental principles have been buried or hidden, they always focus on the external, focus on the behavior, making lists and plans and techniques and so on, and the internal is not changed. And so then they're always going to need the help groups and the support and all these things to try and forcefully suppress the egos and keep the person socially acceptable, keep their behaviors in check. And when we change from the inside, everything is natural and effortless because we have that understanding. So that's how it should be with all these things, whether it's what you consume, how you treat other people, who you associate with, and what you spend your time doing, where in the world you decide to live, all of these things. There's there's rules and there's guidelines and there's traditions, and then there is following what you know to be right for you in the moment. And sometimes that requires courage to go up against people that maybe you respect and look up to, but they, in spite of their wisdom and their maybe higher level of being and more awakened consciousness, they still have their own fallback traditions and mechanical views that they become accustomed to that have really good reasons behind them, but they may not be applicable in all situations.
Yeah, that's absolutely correct. And like I said, it's just been uh the experience in the last few weeks. It's been eye opening, but also just great lessons to be learned, great things you could take for yourself. Uh, Also a lot to work. It's painful, right? But that's good. See, but the thing is like, look, if you feel that pain, you learn those lessons. You're observing yourself, and I feel like the whole situations that we've been in, and there's multiple actually just across different groups, different even with your unconscious family and stuff, and then there's stuff going on there too. And it seems to be this theme that we've been touching on too, and we've been getting these like intuitions to speak on the subject matter, and then it happens. It's not a mistake. This is how things work, you know. And the point is the lesson is there for us. There's also a lesson for everyone else too, and everybody's so busy trying to influence our decisions or influence, because they think they know better, that they're not really getting the lesson for themselves at this moment. So, I mean, it is what it is, but there's always a blessing, and it's grateful for divinity is that, wherever we are, whatever happens, any situation, anytime there's some type of crisis, I believe, which was a word that actually came up 2 weeks ago in a speech from a very respectable brother. And whenever there's that, that's the opportunity to look at yourself and look at the ego. Like it's never bad, right? Like people say some bad things about us. People get mad at you. It's not bad unless you identify with it and you get angry back. When somebody throws mud at you, you wipe it off and you smile back at them. It's really it's that type of situation, and if you humble yourself, you can really learn a lot about yourself and a lot about just how everything works too. Like it's observing your inner state, observing how the collective is, observing the human nature in itself. So I don't know. It's obviously also don't know where things are going, but it's really interesting. It's also really just interesting how everything seems to flow along with the like information that keeps coming down, right? So it's like for whatever reason, not too long ago, the connection to source has just like opened up. And why me? I don't know. Like I said, I'm not a master, very unpolished. I deliver things in a way my communication skills can be a lot better. All of that is learning experience too, and learning through this as well. But it's yeah, I don't know. It's all for the benefit of everyone that's involved. You know what I mean? Including us and everyone else when they realize it. But
We don't
everybody,
worry about what the
yeah,
like.
that's not really the issue. That's why it's also not, that's why there's also not reason to talk about details or anything like that. It's just, everybody is everyone's teacher. We're all each other's teachers. So we're all like, as long as we're learning, every time we interact with somebody, if we feel uncomfortable, good, be grateful, thank divinity, bring it into meditation. And that is what the work, the teachings teach, right? That's what the work teaches. But, I guess it is easy to forget. It is easy to, you know, achieve a certain level, I guess, reach a certain height and then, get complacent. Also, like I'm certain the work gets harder too at that point, right? You just keep going deeper, deeper. There's less ego, means that the only ego that's left is what's really deep and really hard to see in yourself, right? If I'm 80% consciousness and a master, well, what's the 20% that's left, right? Um, it's certainly not something silly like I'm arguing with the guy to Delhi, right? No, it's something probably deep rooted. It could be some type of like deep cultural thing from a past life, or even something really deep in the infraconscious, in the deep sub levels. So yeah, it's just it's all how it's meant to be. It is really fun though to um be on this journey and then connect to things and just see all the threads being pulled, and you can kind of see like where everything has come from. And as long as you stay present, that's what's great too. It's like you stay present and you can just look at the now. Every time you look at the now, every time you go back to say you go to meditation and you look at the now and you compare it to like past nows and stuff, and you can kind of see the thread, how the plan's coming through. You can see all the pieces, right? Because it's like everyone's kind of in their own thing with their own blind spots, including us, but we're all given little things from source that when you weave it all together, it actually really like draws into like one real big master plan. If you like just take a step back and look at it, you realize that like even like the conflicts between each other aren't really conflicts. It's all part of it, right? It's all developed to get us to move in a certain direction. And eventually I'm certain, I don't like to look to the future too much. And it's also not great to look to the future, right? When people have free will, like one thing changes and all these threads can, move in a different direction. There is in a sense an illusion of free will, in the sense I'm pretty sure the being has like no matter what choice we make, there is something that's fated based on that choice. But if you're just looking straight ahead, it's not linear in that sense, right? So, but I do believe that as the world goes the way it is, and there's more of us awaken and more of us feel the sense of urgency to unite and coalesce, that eventually eventually, fingers crossed, that things will coalesce more, and silly petty disagreements over like traditions and values that are irrelevant will slowly fade away. It's fun to be in the process and to be at that point and to see how the lessons are basically coming through to do just exactly that. And we're like literally like in that moment in time right now where it's like everybody's getting their lessons. We need to, put aside things and, work together. And yeah, we have our own missions, but mission is just how purpose is expressed through each individual uniquely. And the purpose is still the same. And that is to do the work to awaken and to help as many of our brothers and sisters also come to the path so they can awaken as well. Because in the end of the day, we are multiple perfect unity. We are all one, but we were all also individuals. But as we help others, we're helping ourselves in the same token.
Yeah, and the funny thing is that consciousness is always informing itself. So what you mentioned about everyone having their own lessons, it is a brilliant masterpiece, and it fits together so perfectly when you are observing. And you know what someone else's lesson is, I don't really care about that. But sometimes you have to really pay attention to find out what your own lesson is. And there was a point in all of when all of these threads were being uncovered that I was in like a confusion because there was different information coming from different sides. And then when I could just step back and observe, then I could see all of the very specific things that were unique to what I needed to work on that were being presented to me. And it really wasn't what I thought. It wasn't that what people were saying was true. It was something else. And so, I don't want to get into the specifics of it, but when you stay present and you really observe and you look for the lesson for yourself, then you will find it. And then you will come to a place of peace about everything. And even if you make a mistake or things don't go in a particular way that you maybe thought would be more supportive or conducive, that's another learning lesson. A lot of people around me uh, were saying things to me to maybe try and scare me or make me doubt my choices. And on one hand, there was the question of, oh, am I just really off and misguided? And the lesson was even bigger than that, that actually you have to stay in your truth and you have to stay grounded, and you're on your own individual journey. So it's not always going to fit the narrative or the dogma or the tradition of a particular group. And that can mean difficult interactions with friends and or people that are peers in mystery studies that maybe you admire and look up to. And that's okay. That's okay if you don't see things the same way. Uh, the whole thing that we've been talking about is that essentially there is no right and wrong from a higher plane. It's all just the experience of consciousness and unique learnings that are viewed through the lens of all these individual light fractals that eventually go back to source. So in some ways, it's important not to get too hung up on anything as such. And that's not to say that we don't have to do the work, but um, we don't need to get too uptight about things either. We have to trust. We have to trust in divinity and its guidance. And we don't really know that much, or we don't have as much control or say in what's happening as we think we do.
No, that's absolutely true. And when you talk about like, it's a good point that and from a higher plane, from a higher, there's a good and evil, right and wrong, and stuff like that. If we really think about like how our perception of what is good and evil and what really is the negative polarity of energy and what is the positive polarity. Well, it's really just like, well, things that are positive are things that resonate at a higher frequency of the superior dimensions, and things that are of a negative frequency, they vibrate at a more dense, more like physical realm frequency. And then it really just becomes then what is your identification with that, right? That's we could break down something like something that everybody would think is evil, right? That's like a murder, right? But that's what takes into going into that murder, right? Well, first of all, the person who wants to kill somebody like believes that they have some whatever for whatever reason they have anger or they just like to have control over somebody or some type of emotion though, right? That is related. They're identified with some type of emotion that's related to a lower frequency. Then it's terrible that they kill somebody. We see it as that also because death, the concept of death, is something related to a lower frequency. In that that wouldn't even happen, right? It would be impossible if our reality, if we're vibrating at a frequency where our reality is higher, that wouldn't even happen to us, right? Because we would never be the person that wants to kill somebody because we don't vibrate at frequency of that, and we also wouldn't attract something like somebody coming to do harm to us in that area either because we're not vibrating at a low enough frequency to attract somebody to do that to us either. So in a sense, it's like it's only as real as you identify with the physical reality in that density. So yes, I guess it's evil, but evil is a concept of the lower density, and we need to start to realize that by removing ourselves from that illusion, that not doesn't mean we don't see like negative polarity things, but it's how we relate to it becomes different, right? We might be starting something that's very altruistic and is going to bring us a lot of like positive energy in the future. And so there'll be some things because the contract of balance itself, that's how creation works. So maybe before we start this endeavor to like help a bunch of people, there's a bunch of negative things happen, not even like something like a harm, but just like little things. Maybe something financially goes bad, or like you like bump into a table or something. Right now, we can look at that as, oh, we're getting attacked and by the evil people, right? The evil dark forces, or we could just that could be our reality, or if our reality is just like, oh well, we're about to ride this wave of positive energy, so for that to happen, some negative energy has to express around us in our reality because that's just how it works. Well, then now I don't think I'm getting attacked by evil people because it's literally the same thing. Like nothing happens differently in the construct, right? Like I can imagine I'm being attacked by dark magic people, and then they will appear in my internal world, and I will have like people casting evil spells at me, or I could just see it for what it is and go on with my life.
Perception is everything.
Mm-hmm. And even to a certain extent too, there are people that do, I guess, dabble in dark arts, right? So like in actual physical that awaken the consciousness through ego, and they do bad things, but they're not able to, for example, if somebody like that would not cast a spell on you, for example, if you vibrate too high, because their spells wouldn't work because your perception is right. So their spells are contingent on you having fear or paranoia. Somebody who has no fear or paranoia, literally if they try to send like an evil energy spell your way, it would work. So they don't attack you. They're aware of this too. They look for victims that are full of something that they can attack. So even
They
in
need
that,
your ego. They need your
Mhm.
ego
Yeah, they
to
need that to attack you. So they can't even
else.
attack you, even though those people do actually exist. They can only attack you if you have something in you that corresponds to their level of understanding.
I remember there was a story about the witch doctors in Africa sometimes would send a spell to Christian individuals. And this was hearsay, but they said that when they would send the spell out and it would go to the Christian, if a witch doctor was foolish enough to target someone of that vibration with the Christic force, that the witch doctor would actually die. So if someone came to them and said, "Oh, can you attack this certain person?" and they found that they were a Christian, they would just say, "No, I'm not doing a spell on them," because it was dangerous.
No, yeah, I don't know if it actually blows back or not. I mean, I guess if they believe it, it would, right? Because even the black magician, right? They're in an egoic reality. So if they're under the belief that if they cast a spell that's going to bounce back on them, then the spell will bounce back on them. But that's a very interesting concept, for sure.
Yeah, I think we covered off most of the topic for today.
Yeah, I think that's good. I'll actually have one last thing too. It's in a sense too. We have to think about like when we talk about how our realities too. Another good thing point to think of too when we talk about these good and evil. Isn't it interesting how only like people that are like spiritual, right, are going to get attacked by like demons, right? We think of like the unconscious atheist, right? They're definitely still have egos and they're definitely still getting drained in the astral, right? They can't astral like right. But like the way somebody like that gets drained in the astral is like they'll be like having dreams where they're so unconscious that they're just like going to work again, and then they're drained by the repeating, but it's not like they go to the astral and then their dreams are getting attacked by Satan, right? They're just reliving their mechanical life because they just are so mechanical, and in that way they still do get their energy drained, but it's not in a way of like these like evil attacks or spells, right? So even in that sense, and that's someone who's not even awakened, right? So it really is your perception of reality that brings on these like negative forces. You have to believe that they exist, that they're real for them to even affect you, even from an unconscious standpoint.
Hmm. Because at the end of the day, it's all energy. And so energy is energy. And even us, we are crystallized into matter, but we are energy. And yes, we have all these components, these bodies, and we have consciousness, but when you break it all up, it's energy made up of three forces, and therefore how we perceive it can be in a million different ways, but behind it, it's the same forces.
Yep.
So we've had a really good conversation, and this is definitely, it's topics that those who know will know, and those who maybe haven't studied any mystery studies, it could be something really interesting. I don't even know how they would perceive this conversation, but hey, come along for the ride, and there will be a lot more, a variety of topics, and there's going to be something that uh, can give you a good place to start as well. But lots of interesting things you probably won't hear anywhere else. So we will close out now. And the message is be the change you want to see, be the light this world needs.
And as always, remember to vibrate at a higher frequency and maximize Dharma for the collective.
Thank you, and see you next time.